Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the paint bucket, gradient, and 3D material drop tools. These can all be found over here. Starting with the gradient tool, we're going to start with the paint bucket tool, but gradient is the default tool that's on the list. So starting with the paint bucket tool is basically just used to fill an area. You can fill it with a color or you can fill it with a pattern. But first, we'll take a look at what the options are for the paint bucket tool. The first option is the foreground and pattern. Foreground simply means that it's going to fill your canvas with whatever color you have as your foreground color. Right now I have black set as my foreground. So it fills the canvas with black. If I choose a different color, red, fills the canvas with red. I'll come up here and choose pattern. I get an option to choose what pattern I want to use. You can change the pattern by clicking on it and choosing your pattern. This is a diagonal line pattern here. If I fill my whole canvas with the diagonal line pattern, you can see that it has filled it all the way through. Or I can undo that. Choose a different pattern, see what that looks like. Try egghead. This is one of my own custom patterns. You can fill the canvas with egghead. And there he is. It's a really cool way to just fill a large area with, some kind of a background pattern that you want to use. Okay, we'll set it back to foreground color. And take a look at the next option, which is the blend mode. And in order to see the blend mode, I'm going to turn on an image here. So with the blend mode, I can change to set a specific mode before I fill the canvas. Now this is only going to work if you are on a layer that has an image. Up to this point, we've been filling on a blank layer, which just fills that blank layer. If we want to see one of these modes take effect, we will need to fill in, we'll choose multiply, we'll need to select the tree layer. You can see that was multiply, we'll try overlay. See, it's a little bit different. There you go. Now we have an overlay effect where it filled in where the tree is. Now what Photoshop's doing when you fill an area of an image, it works very similar to the magic wand or the magic eraser type of selection. It's filling an area based on the tolerance that you've set. And so it's looking at the area you clicked, which here I'm clicking a shade of blue. I have my tolerance set to 32, and it's just filling out similar shades of blue, or when I clicked on the tree, it was that shade of dark brown, and it's filling that. Let's go back up here. Set this back. Okay. Opacity is simply the opacity of how transparent we want the fill to be. Go back to our blank layer. We'll fill in at, let's just put it at 53% opacity, and you can see that it fills the layer, but we can see through it. So choosing different levels of opacity, you will see how that affects how much you can see of your fill. You can barely see that. Okay. Set that back to 100. So the tolerance, like I just mentioned, will determine how much of the canvas or the color can get filled. So let's take a look at what that means. We go back to the tree layer, and we click in this area, it fills that much of the blue. It's taking the spot I clicked and going that far out in shades of blue. If we increase the tolerance, say 60, it should look for more shades of blue. And now it's filling a larger area. Or vice versa, If we go down to 20, you can see that it's filling a smaller area. Or 5, even less. Very small area. Okay, so we'll set that back up here. About 50 is good. Now, anti-alias, that is just exactly what it is for everything else. It smooths the edges between the transitions of color at the edge. And then contiguous is going to be whether or not it's broken by another color. For instance, here we have it's only filling on the left side of the tree, but if I were to uncheck contiguous, it will grab that color wherever it's at on the canvas. And then all layers is simply going to choose that color from all the layers that you have active. So if you have this blue on this tree layer and then you have a similar color on another layer and you wanted to consider all of the layers, you would choose all layers. Okay, I think that pretty much does it for the paint bucket tool. Now let's change to the gradient tool. The gradient tool is pretty neat. It can it basically fills an area just like the paint bucket tool, but it fills it with a gradual blend between multiple colors. So you can see up here in the options, it's showing me a blend of orange to white. So let's go turn this tree layer back off and go back to a white canvas. So what this is doing is it's blending between the foreground and the background colors I have. If I were to choose a different foreground color, let's say red, it's going to change to a red to white gradient. Okay, let's go back to, or green to white. Okay, and if we change the background color, it's going to change the gradient to go from green to whatever the background color is you chose. Now I've got a green to yellow. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So once you click with the gradient tool, you'll hold down the button and then you can drag a line in whichever direction you want. And this is going to determine which direction your gradient fills. So if I go this way, it's going to start with green in the upper left, stretching down to the yellow in the lower right. Just like that. Let's undo that. If I do it the opposite, start down the bottom and we'll go up. Let's start with green lower, going up to yellow in the upper area. Let's change our colors back to something like orange here. Background color. We'll just say red. Okay. So orange to red now. Now with the fill options here, you have a little bit of control over how you want your gradient to fill. If we click on the gradient, it comes up with some options. You can see that it has some pre-selected gradients. If we choose like this one, blue to orange, now we have a blue to orange gradient. Or maybe we choose this multicolored brown. And we fill. Now we can see that we've got various different shades of this brown that have filled. You can also get to those pre-selected colors by just clicking on the down arrow right here on the right and choose different patterns. But by clicking on this and having the box come up, you get a couple of other options. You can change it from solid to noise. You can change the smoothness of the gradient. And you can actually change the gradient itself. So if we come here to our foreground background color, we can actually add in more gradient transitions by just clicking somewhere. Now I've got another little point here where I can change this color by double clicking on it. Let's change it to blue, and I have a gradient that goes between the orange foreground to the blue that I've chosen here to the red background. And I can move where I want that gradient to happen anywhere in the transition. Let's take a look at what that does. Now that might not be very pretty, but you can see what the gradient's doing. We come back here. Now we've got these other little key points here, these little diamonds that really kind of refine exactly where the gradient occurs. If it's in the middle, it's going to be the smoothest transition. If you move it more to one side or the other, you can see it kind of gets a harder, quicker transition because it's trying to transition faster by that point. And that happens on both sides of, or anywhere you put it. And you can really do as many as you want here. I can click again and make another color. Click again and make another color. And this can be as crazy as you want it to be. And you can come in here and fill, and now you've got all kinds of different colors. And that's how you would get an effect like these ones that they've got preset, or this brown one, which has the multiple transitions. Okay, let's go ahead and undo that. And I'm going to reset my colors here. And this is a shortcut key to know. If you hit D, just the letter D, it will reset back to black as your foreground, white as your background. Every time, no matter what you've got going on, press D and it'll reset it. It's a good little tip to know. Okay, up to this point we've been talking about solid fill gradients, where you have solid color transitions from one color to the other. The next thing I'd like to point out is where you can have a color transition to transparency. That's a foreground to transparent. First option is foreground to background. The second option is foreground to transparent. What foreground to transparent is going to do is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to start with the foreground color, which we have set as black, and it's going to fade out. Let's see what that looks like with an image. Come back. So if we set the foreground to, well, let's go back to an orange again. And do foreground to transparent. Starting at the top, it's going to foreground to transparent from the point where you click to where you drag it out to. And that can be anywhere in the image. So you can come in here and you can adjust where you want the transparency to happen. It can happen anywhere along this line. And same thing with these little diamonds here. It adjusts how, add a little key point in there. Adjusts how smooth you want that transition to be. Now let's talk about the different types of gradients that we have. The one we've been working with here is called a linear gradient, and that's the first option. Let's go back to foreground, background. Let's choose another color here. Let's go back with the red on the background. And we'll choose one of the other ones. All these here are different types of gradients. We have the radial gradient, the angle gradient, the reflected gradient, and the diamond gradient. And we'll take a quick look at what all of those look like. Linear gradient we've seen is just basically lines of color that transition into other lines of color. If we do radial gradient, what's going to happen is the gradient is going to form a circle from starting with the foreground color, where you click into the background color outside the circle. Let's get rid of this layer here and add a new one. Get rid of the tree. We're going to click here in the upper left. We're going to drag it out so it'll go orange to red, making a nice little circle here in the upper left. So that's what a radial gradient does. And the farther you drag out, and this applies to the linear gradient too, the farther you drag out, the longer the gradient is. It's not only choosing direction, it's choosing how far to go. If we do a short little line, it's going to make a short little gradient. And then we have the angle gradient. Angle gradient is just a little weird. It makes a hard edge and gradients out against the opposite edge based on the direction that you choose. And then we have the reflected gradient. Reflected gradient is kind of similar to the radial gradient, except it's kind of like a blend between the radial gradient and the linear gradient, where it has a central color and blends out on both sides to the background color. It starts with the foreground color in the middle and blends out to the background color on each of the sides. Now it looks like this. You can see we have our foreground color in the middle, and on the top and on the bottom it's blending out to the background color. And that'll work in any direction just like the other gradients. Then we have, lastly here, the diamond gradient. Diamond gradient is really just like the radial gradient, but it does it in a diamond fashion. And you can see that more evident with the straight up and down gradient. You can do that in any angle, any width, as big or small as we want it to be. Just like the paint bucket, we have a blend mode. If we're going to apply this gradient onto an image, we can choose to start with the blend mode. For instance, we can do multiply, and we'll go ahead and blend it over that tree. And now you can see we've got our light to dark gradient, and it's blending right over the top of this tree image with the multiply effect, or multiply mode. Or we could choose, any type of mode. We'll try overlay and see what that looks like. And you can experiment with the different types of modes and see how that affects your image. Opacity is the same as always. It's how much transparency you want your gradient fill to have. We lower the transparency, come back up here onto the blank layer, and we can see that we can see through it a lot. And then reverse, let's set this back to 100. Reverse simply reverses the order your gradient is working in. So instead of we start with foreground to background, it'll just reverse background to foreground. You could also do that down here, but that's more useful when you're doing something with like a complex gradient, such as something like this, and you need to do it backwards. Okay, back to foreground, background. Dither is a way to kind of ensure that your transition of colors is smooth. Sometimes banding can occur between your colors. This isn't something that you want. I'll show you an example of what banding looks like. Let's go back to black to white. And we do a simple black to white gradient. That's nice and smooth looking here. Banding looks like this. Sometimes you see this where the color transitions just aren't quite smooth. You can actually see lines between the different shades. And in order to control this, you would want to have dithering on. Dithering is on by default, so you shouldn't usually have to worry about that, but if somehow you've checked it off and you see something like this, then you'll want to make sure that you turn it on. And then last but not least, we have transparency. Transparency simply turns the transparency ability off for the gradient fill. So if we come and choose the foreground to transparent option, we have that going on, but we turn transparency off, we no longer have any transparency in the gradient. That covers the gradient tool pretty well, I think. Alright, now the last thing that's in the gradient and paint bucket tool option is the 3D material drop tool. This tool really works in conjunction with the 3D tools, which need to have a lesson of their own, but I'll show you really quickly just what that does. So we come over here, I've got a 3D image or a 3D file already kind of open. So you can see this is a pyramid. Now what the 3D drop tool does in essence, it fills an entire surface of your 3D object with whatever pattern or texture you're trying to fill it with. If we come and choose it, we can come up here and the options, we have different patterns. If we choose this, say we'll choose this blue one, I'll come and click on this side and you can see that it filled this side of my pyramid with blue. And I'll come up and choose the red one and I can fill this side of my pyramid with red. Now without getting into the real complexities of this tool, that's kind of what it does in a nutshell, just so you've seen it. Alright, we'll go back here and that's going to do it for this lesson. So I hope you learned a lot here. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you want to know more or you have any questions. I'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.